"You really think he can hear you, old man?" The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of bored arrogance that only youth can truly perfect. It cut through the reverent silence that hung over the manicured lawns of Arlington National Cemetery. Randall Oliver did not flinch. He remained kneeling, one hand resting on the top of the simple white headstone, his back straight despite the 83 years he carried. The name carved into the marble was as familiar to him as his own: Michael T. Callahan, a name that was once a boisterous laugh, a shared canteen of water, a desperate whisper in the dark. Now it was just a name on a stone. The kid, no older than 19, took a few steps closer. He held his phone up, though not obviously recording, the screen casting a pale artificial light on his face. He wore a designer hoodie and a smirk that seemed permanently affixed. "I mean, it's a nice gesture and all, I guess, but you're talking to a rock, just so you know." Randall finished his silent conversation with Michael. He ran his weathered fingers over the engraved date of death, a day that was burned into his memory with the heat of explosions and the chill of loss. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself to his feet. His joints protested with a series of dull clicks and pops, a private language of age and old injuries. He turned to face the boy, his eyes a pale, clear blue that had seen jungles and deserts, parade grounds and hospital wards. They held no anger, only a quiet, bottomless weariness. "He can't hear me," Randall said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I know that. I'm not talking, I'm listening." The boy's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He recovered quickly, doubling down on his condescending tone. "Listening? To what? The grass growing? Dude, come on. It's a bit much, don't you think? You're kind of holding up the scenery here. People are trying to take pictures." He gestured vaguely with his phone towards the distant Lincoln Memorial, as if the cemetery were merely a picturesque foreground for tourist snapshots. Randall's gaze didn't waver. He simply stood there, a pillar of calm in the face of a rising tide of disrespect. Other visitors in the section had begun to notice. A family with young children hushed their conversation, casting anxious glances. A woman in a black dress standing a few rows away paused in her own moment of grief, her brow furrowing with concern. The air grew thick with unspoken disapproval, but the boy seemed to feed on it, his casual cruelty escalating into a performance. "Look at this place," the kid continued, his voice getting louder. He kicked at a small, perfectly manicured tuft of grass at the edge of the grave plot. "All these stones, all lined up. It's like, okay, we get it. You were soldiers. Big deal. My uncle's in sales, and he travels way more than you guys ever did. You don't see us putting up 1,000 statues for him." Randall Oliver's hand, which had been hanging loosely at his side, drifted to the breast pocket of his simple tweed jacket. His fingers brushed against a small, solid object within. He didn't take it out. It was just a habit, a need to touch a piece of his past, a tangible link to the man buried beneath his feet. "This isn't about statues," Randall said, his voice still quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the boy's chatter. "This is about promises." "Promises?" The kid let out a short, derisive laugh. "What promises? That you'd come talk to his ghost every year. A little creepy, don't you think? You should be at home watching TV or something. Not out here LARPing as a war hero." He took another step closer, invading Randall's personal space. He lowered his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, a foul parody of intimacy. "Let me guess. You were a cook? A supply clerk? Pushing papers while the real heroes were out there doing the work." Every word was a small, sharp jab designed to provoke, to shatter the old man's composure. But Randall remained placid. It was a stillness he had learned long ago, in places where sudden movements could mean the difference between life and death. He had faced down men with rifles and grenades, men whose eyes burned with a hatred far hotter than this boy's casual disdain. The kid was an annoyance, a gnat buzzing in the solemn air of a cathedral. A small crowd was now overtly watching. Phones had emerged, and this time they were definitely recording. The scene was too compelling. The stoic elderly man in his Sunday best and the sneering, obnoxious youth, a perfect tableau of generational conflict. The boy noticed the new attention and swelled with it. His audience was growing. He pointed a finger at Randall's jacket. "What's that you're holding on to in there? Your war medals? Let's see 'em. Bet you bought them at a pawn shop. Bet you've got a whole story cooked up about how you single-handedly won the war." He gestured dramatically at the headstone. "Was he your best buddy? Did you hold him in your arms as he died? I've seen all the movies, Grandpa. Your stories are old news." Randall's fingers tightened around the object in his pocket. It was a Zippo lighter, its silver casing worn smooth by decades of handling. The hinge was loose, the flint wheel dull, but it was his most prized possession. The boy's words, meant to mock, had inadvertently struck a chord of truth. The world around Randall seemed to warp and fade for a heartbeat. The manicured green of Arlington dissolved into the muddy, suffocating darkness of a bunker in the Ashau Valley. The polite murmurs of the crowd were replaced by the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades and the frantic shouts of young men. Rain, thick and warm, plastered his hair to his forehead. He saw himself, a kid of 20, huddled over a map with Mike Callahan. The only light came from the small, stubborn flame of the Zippo, casting dancing shadows on their tense, grime-streaked faces. Mike had grinned, his teeth a flash of white in the gloom. "Don't lose that thing, Randy," he'd said. "It's the only working lighter in this whole damn jungle. It's lucky." The memory was so vivid, so complete, that Randall could almost smell the metallic tang of the rain and the damp earth. It lasted only a second, a flash echo from a lifetime ago, before the present snapped back into focus. The boy was still talking, his voice a grating buzz. "See, he's spaced out, probably forgot where he is. This is just sad." About 50 yards away, near a large oak tree, the woman in the black dress, Eleanor Vance, had seen enough. She was a retired Army colonel, here to visit her husband's grave. She recognized the look in Randall's eyes, not as senility but as the profound, unshakable focus of a soldier. She also recognized the boy's behavior as an intolerable desecration of hallowed ground. Her first instinct was to march over and verbally dismantle the young man with the full force of her command voice, but she knew that would only create a bigger scene, one that would further disrespect the quiet dignity of the place and the old man at its center. There was a better way. She turned and walked away briskly, pulling her phone from her purse. She had a different number, one she hadn't used in years, a direct line to the office of the regimental commander of the 3rd U.S. Infantry, the Old Guard, the unit responsible for Arlington National Cemetery. A young specialist answered, his voice crisp and professional. "Colonel Vance's office, how may I help you?" he said, a holdover from her time in service. "This is Colonel Eleanor Vance, retired," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I am at Arlington, Section 60. There is a civilian actively harassing an elderly visitor at a gravesite. The visitor is a veteran. The civilian's behavior is escalating, and he is causing a significant disturbance." "I understand, ma'am," the specialist replied. "We can dispatch a security patrol immediately." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I don't think you understand. You don't need security. You need to send a sentinel, and you need to do it now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A request for a Tomb Guard sentinel to intervene in a public disturbance was highly unusual, almost unheard of. "A sentinel, ma'am?" "Listen to me, son." Eleanor's voice took on the unmistakable edge of command. "The man being harassed is displaying a bearing I have not seen in a very long time. There is a profound disrespect occurring on sacred ground. This requires more than a security guard. It requires a statement. Get the sergeant of the guard on the line." Her insistence worked. A moment later, a deeper, more serious voice came on. "This is Sergeant First Class Miller, Sergeant of the Guard." "What is the situation, Colonel?" Eleanor quickly recounted the scene. The sneering boy, the stoic old man, the growing crowd. "The kid is mocking his service, Sergeant, right here, in Arlington. He's turning this place into a sideshow." "Can you describe the veteran, ma'am?" Sergeant Miller asked, his tone all business. "Elderly, over 80 I'd guess. Tweed jacket, gray hair. But his posture, it's perfect. He's standing there like a statue. He's holding something in his pocket, something he won't let go of." "Does he have any visible insignia, ma'am? Any pins, any medals?" Eleanor squinted, trying to get a better look from her vantage point. "It's hard to see. Wait, yes, on his lapel. It's very small, very faded. A simple blue pin, with a cluster of white stars." The line went completely silent for 3 full seconds. When Sergeant Miller spoke again, all traces of procedural calm were gone. His voice was tight with a stunning, almost explosive urgency. "Colonel, where did you say you were? Section 60? Near which plot?" Eleanor gave him the coordinates, reading the name on a nearby headstone. "Understood, Colonel," Miller said, his voice now imbued with a tone of awe. "Help is on the way. Do not engage. Just keep an eye on him. Keep Mr. Oliver safe." "Oliver?" Eleanor asked. "How did you know his name?" But the line was already dead. Inside the Tomb Guard quarters beneath the Memorial Amphitheater, Sergeant Miller slammed the phone down. He turned to a young sentinel who was meticulously preparing his uniform for the next changing of the guard. "Get the commander." Now, the young sentinel, accustomed to the rhythmic, monastic calm of the quarters, was startled by the sergeant's intensity. "Sergeant," did I stutter, specialist? Get the commander on the horn and pull every file we have on Medal of Honor recipient Randall Oliver. Go." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Randall Oliver. It was a name spoken only in hushed, reverent tones in this place. A name from the history books. A legend. The young sentinel's face went pale. He didn't just move, he flew. The entire atmosphere of the quarters shifted from quiet discipline to coiled electric tension. The sergeant of the guard was already grabbing his own dress coat, his movements sharp and precise. They weren't sending a security patrol. They were mobilizing an honor guard. Back at the grave, the cocky kid had reached the apex of his arrogance. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, saw the phones pointed in his direction, and mistook their shock for admiration. He was the star of the show. He decided it was time for his grand finale. He scoffed dramatically. "You know what? I'm done with this. You're just a crazy old man. You probably don't even know the guy in the ground. You just come here for attention." He then committed his final, unforgivable act of desecration. He reached down and, with a flick of his fingers, knocked the single simple poppy Randall had placed at the base of the headstone onto the grass. "There," the kid said with a triumphant sneer. "Littering. That's against the rules. I'm going to have to call security on you. Have you escorted out? Maybe they'll take you somewhere you can get some help. A home for confused old wannabe heroes." He raised his phone to his ear, a cruel pantomime of making a call, his face twisted in a mask of smug satisfaction. He had pushed the old man as far as he could, and now he was going to have him removed. He had won. But his victory was short-lived. A sound began to permeate the air, a sound so alien to the soft grass and quiet grief of the cemetery that it commanded instant attention. It was a crisp, rhythmic clicking. Click, 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 click. The sound of purpose, the sound of honor, the sound of the old guard. From behind a row of ancient magnolia trees, a figure emerged, walking with a gait that was less a walk and more a form of silent, disciplined proclamation. A tomb guard sentinel. In his immaculate dress blues, his M14 rifle held in a perfect port arms, advanced across the lawn. The sun glinted off the polished bayonet, off the glossy visor of his cap, off the medals on his chest. He was the living embodiment of the cemetery's sacred duty, and he was not alone. Walking 2 paces behind him was the sergeant of the guard, and behind him 2 commissioned officers from the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Their presence was a wave of pure, concentrated authority that washed over the scene. The murmuring crowd fell utterly silent. The phones that had been recording the spectacle were lowered in a collective gesture of awe and reverence. The atmosphere changed instantly. This was no longer a public disturbance, it was a ceremony. The kid's smug expression dissolved into a puddle of confusion and fear. He lowered his phone, his mouth hanging slightly open. He thought the security he had pretended to call had arrived. But this was something else entirely. This was something he didn't understand, something far beyond his realm of entitled mockery. The sentinel did not look at the kid. He did not scan the crowd. His eyes were fixed on one person and one person only, Randall Oliver. He continued his implacable advance until he was precisely 3 paces in front of the old man. With a movement that was a blur of controlled power, he brought his rifle to order arms, the slap of his hand on the stock echoing in the silence. Then he executed a flawless textbook salute, his gloved hand a rigid line from his brow to the sky. The click of his heels coming together was like the crack of a gavel calling a sacred court to order. The sentinel held the salute, his body as rigid and unmoving as the marble headstones surrounding them. He then spoke, and his voice was not the conversational tone of a police officer or a security guard. It was the formal, resonant voice of history itself, a voice trained to carry across hallowed ground without shouting. "Mr. Oliver," the sentinel declared, his words clear and sharp. "It is an honor, sir." The kid stared, his brain struggling to process the scene. The sentinel was saluting the old man. The officers were standing at attention for the old man. This wasn't an intervention, it was an act of profound deference. One of the senior officers, a full colonel with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of a long and distinguished career, stepped forward. He did not address the kid or Randall. He addressed the crowd, the silent witnesses. "Some of you may be wondering what you are witnessing," the colonel said, his voice calm but powerful. "Allow me to explain. This ground is sacred because of the men and women buried here, but it is also sacred because of the living legends who walk among us, who carry the memory of their service with quiet dignity." He paused, and his gaze settled on Randall Oliver. "You are standing in the presence of First Sergeant Randall Oliver, United States Army, retired, on March 12, 1968, during an ambush in the highlands of Vietnam. Then Sergeant Oliver exposed himself to intense enemy fire to single-handedly destroy 3 enemy machine gun nests, allowing his trapped platoon to withdraw to a defensible position. Wounded multiple times, he refused medical evacuation, organizing the defense and coordinating air support for 6 straight hours until reinforcements arrived. For these actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. A collective gasp went through the crowd, the nation's highest award for valor. The name on the blue pin with the white stars on Randall's lapel suddenly became clear. But the colonel wasn't finished. What the official record does not state is that First Sergeant Oliver declined a battlefield commission on 3 separate occasions, choosing to remain an NCO to stay with his men. After his service, he could have spent his life on the speaking circuit, celebrated as a hero. Instead, he came here to Arlington. He served as the very first sergeant of the guard for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in its modern era. The standards of perfection, the code of discipline, the unwavering dedication you see in this sentinel before you. He gestured to the saluting soldier, were forged and written by the man you see standing right here. He is not just a hero, he is our teacher, he is our standard. The vindication was absolute, a crushing weight of truth that settled over the lawn. The crowd's expressions had shifted from morbid curiosity to profound, unadulterated awe. The woman who had made the call, Colonel Vance, felt tears welling in her eyes. The kid, the cocky, sneering antagonist, looked as though he had been physically struck. His face was pale, his bravado utterly shattered, replaced by a horrifying public shame. The colonel finally turned his gaze, cold and hard as granite, upon the boy. He took a slow step towards him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet intensity of his words was more punishing than any shout. "You stand on the resting place of warriors," the colonel said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "And you mock a giant. You bring your petty arrogance and your cheap cynicism to a place that was paid for in blood and sacrifice. You are a disgrace not because you are young but because you are ignorant, and you wear that ignorance like a badge of honor." The boy flinched as if he'd been slapped. He began to stammer. I didn't know I was just—" "You knew he was an old man," the colonel cut him off. "You knew he was a veteran. You knew he was here to pay his respects. That should have been enough, but it wasn't." He pointed a single steady finger at the poppy lying discarded on the grass. "Pick it up." The command was not a request. The boy scrambled to obey, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the small fabric flower. He held it up, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Now," the colonel said, his voice unwavering, "place it back on the headstone, and you will do it with the respect it deserves." As the humiliated boy shuffled forward to place the poppy back on the cool marble, Randall Oliver finally spoke again. His voice was not directed at the boy, nor at the colonel. It was for the young sentinel, who still held his salute, his eyes locked forward. "At ease, soldier," Randall said gently. The sentinel immediately snapped his rifle to his side and stood in a perfect parade rest. Randall gave him a small, weary smile. Then he looked at the name on the stone. "It's not about me," he said, his voice carrying to everyone in the silent crowd. "None of this is. It's about him. It's about all of them." He swept a hand out, a gesture that encompassed the endless rows of white headstones. "Make sure they remember the names on the stones. That's all that matters. The names." His words hung in the air, a lesson in humility and grace delivered at the very moment of his own public triumph. He then looked down at the old silver Zippo lighter, which he had finally taken out of his pocket. He clicked it open, and even after all these years, a small, steady flame flickered to life. Another memory, sharp and poignant, cut through the present. He wasn't in Arlington anymore. He was in a field hospital, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood. Mike Callahan was on a stretcher, pale and still, a bandage covering half his chest. Randall had pressed the Zippo into his friend's hand. "You hold on to this," young Randall had said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "It's lucky. I'll get it back from you when we're stateside. You hear me? We'll have a beer." Mike had given him a weak smile and a thumbs up. It was the last time he ever saw him. The lighter had been returned to him later, along with a folded flag and a lifetime of regret. It wasn't a souvenir of war. It was the weight of an unkept promise, a promise to bring a friend home. The fallout from the incident was swift but quiet, just as Randall would have wanted. The video of the confrontation, the arrival of the Sentinels, and the colonel's speech went viral, but the focus remained on Randall's quiet dignity and the honor of the old guard. The boy's name was never released to the public. He wasn't arrested or charged, but he was issued a formal trespass warning from Arlington National Cemetery. More significantly, he was required to attend a series of mandatory educational sessions with the cemetery's historian. He learned about the heroes buried there, about the meaning of service, and about the cost of the freedom he had so casually taken for granted. Months passed. The seasons began to turn. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young man was meticulously cleaning a row of headstones in a quiet, less visited section of the cemetery. He worked with a focus and a reverence that was wholly new to him. He was a volunteer, part of a new program born from the incident, aimed at teaching local youth the importance of respect and remembrance. Across the lawn, he saw a familiar figure, Randall Oliver, standing before the grave of Michael T. Callahan, just as he had before. The young man stopped his work. He didn't approach. He didn't dare interrupt. He simply stood, took off the baseball cap he was wearing, and held it over his heart. He stood there for a long time, a silent, respectful sentinel of his own making. From across the expanse of green, Randall Oliver finished his visit. As he turned to leave, he saw the young man. Their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no grand gesture, no spoken words of forgiveness. There didn't need to be. Randall gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The young man nodded back. A silent apology offered, and a quiet lesson understood. Then the old soldier turned and walked away, his duty done, leaving the silence and the honor of the place to settle once more over the names on the stones. The quietest heroes often carry the heaviest stories. If you were moved by Randall Oliver's story of dignity and honor, please like this video, share it to remind others of the meaning of respect, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that deserve to be told.